I'm Ira Joy, and welcome to On Courage, a podcast that explores a fundamental virtue for each one of us, no matter our backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. After a career setback, I wrestled deeply with self-doubt and fear, eventually realizing that in order to rebuild my confidence, I had to start by rediscovering my courage. I've been reading books and listening to experts, but I figured I needed to be surrounding myself with courageous people too. And that's why I'm here with you as you listen today, hopefully on board my mission to learn from creative people who have harnessed the power of courage to find success in their careers and fulfillment in their lives. This is a podcast on courage for all those who, like me, long to grow a little more courageous each and every day. Today's guest is Stu Buckland, an independent podcaster, media producer, and content creator. I had the pleasure of meeting Stu several years ago when we worked together at Network 10. It was really great to reconnect with him and learn more about him, and not just the great things he's accomplished over the last 10 years, but also about his aspirations as a child and a teenager navigating his creativity. We talk about the creative process, about failure and success, and he teaches me about the courage it takes to learn to trust your instincts. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Stu. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Yeah, good to see you.
I might kickstart by asking you to just introduce yourself. Just give the listener a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I would call myself a podcast and media nerd. I'm a dad to two kids, and I've been working in media pretty much for the last 20 plus years. Sounds a lot when you sit back and think about it. But I've always wanted to do creative work, and in the last 15 years or so, I've spent a lot of time working for Network 10 and also doing a fair bit in the podcast space.
Fantastic, which I'm sure we'll explore more throughout the conversation. But before we do, I'd love to rewind the clock a little bit and cast your mind back to maybe your childhood days or even your adolescent days. I'd like to get a sense of who Stu was as a young'un and whether there were significant memories or events that you can recall that maybe gave hints to the kind of creative work that you're doing today.
I suppose I've always been a show-off, which is pretty much the key to following creative work in your life. I think probably one of the first things I ever did was improvise a song about an elephant when I was about 6 to my extended family. Whenever we would have get-togethers, I would sing the elephant song, and it was an ever-evolving thing. The lyrics never stayed the same. It would just kind of changed without any verses or choruses. It was just a ongoing thing that just kept going until someone politely kind of directed attention elsewhere, I guess. And then I think one of the main things I can remember doing when I was younger was making my own radio shows on cassette tape, which I don't know how many would know much about cassette tapes, but I would essentially make my own podcasts on tapes before podcasts were a thing. As I got older, I got more into film and TV and theatre and that sort of thing, and ended up studying that at university.
Oh, fantastic. Well, tell us a bit more about that awareness that was the path you wanted to pursue. And, aside from your clear passion for those things, were there any other influences that you had around you that shaped you to make those decisions to study artistic subjects?
I think I was obsessed with comedy as a teenager. So watched a lot of TV and just always found myself drawn to comedy. This is in the 90s when I was a teenager, so there was the Working Dog Now. They were the D Generation back then. Their shows like The Late Show and Frontline, a lot of other ABC comedies, Doug Anthony All Stars, Roy and HG, a lot of Andrew Denton, a lot of that sort of stuff. I just found that, that was the main thing that brought joy. And so it just felt like something that I wanted to pursue. Going on to uni to do all that sort of thing was, I can't admit that it was a brave choice, because I essentially did it because I knew I liked it and I didn't know what else I was doing with myself. I had a relative who was a barrister who was keen to get me to come and shadow him at work and learn about that to see if I was interested in that. My priorities probably weren't in the right spot at that time, and yeah, I mean, I was just too fickle. I would get interested in something, and then a couple of weeks later get interested in something else. So I guess I didn't trust myself to pick or to try and pursue anything else at uni at that point, other than what I'd known that I'd been enjoying nonstop my
Yeah.
whole life, which was comedy and creativity.
I find that I can't call it maybe a transition point when you're leaving school, you're leaving the education system into the workforce, that, we're expected to have the answers or to have clarity. But the truth is, a lot of us, I'm sure people who just heard you say that you were fickle and you were indecisive, that's very common. Most of us were that, even if we had passions, and that's the thing we'll get into around creativity, is that the passion is so vast. There's so many aspects about creative, ambitions, that you can't pinpoint exactly what career that's going to look like. It's just, I enjoy this. I love being a part of this world, but what does it look like
Yeah.
in terms of a job?
I don't think I'd ever thought about it too consciously, but I assume subconsciously I thought, if that sort of thing can give me joy, then there's maybe there's the ability to give other people joy if I try and do it. That kind of
Oh,
thing. And
I love that.
it's it's hard to say, if I ever accomplish that to any meaningful degree. But that was certainly, I think, the intent, without obviously being a bit of a, fairly thoughtless teenage boy, not analyzing things too closely.
Yeah. And a lot of these things we only become aware of in our older, wiser age. So
Yeah.
I totally understand. But I think it's interesting what you said earlier about creatives typically wanting to show off and be the center of attention, versus what you just said now about wanting to create and be part of something that brings other people joy. I think that's perhaps maybe a side of, this industry that maybe isn't really heroed much, because it does seem like something that's self-motivated and, attention seeking. But at the
Oh,
end of the
yeah.
day, it is in service of other people. It's in service of entertainment and education and inspiration, all that. So I want to pick your brain more about that. Like, when, as you're leaving uni now and looking for a career, what kind of jobs were appealing to you that were giving you a sense of, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can be of service and bring people the joy that these things gave me.
Well, I enjoyed my uni experience, and I think what I enjoyed most was, getting in there and doing the creative process. After uni, I was trying to do some acting, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, I think something that doesn't get drilled in enough when you're younger or a student in that creative world is that, to be a successful, I think, actor or artist or musician or so on, what percentage of the job is actually, business focused and self-promotion focused rather than actually sitting there being amazing and creative. And unfortunately, I found pretty quickly that, I wasn't suited to that side of things. So I found it, quite difficult, and kind of didn't pursue it after very long. Myself and some friends tried making short films and some short theatre productions and that sort of thing, and tried and presented ourselves as a company and tried to pitch some things, but I don't think that we had the right knowledge. We probably should have done more in terms of learning how to pitch things properly and all that sort of thing, rather than going, this is probably how it's done.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. So there was a lot of just getting into it and just improvising and
You can say arrogance, Ira. It was arrogance. Yeah.
but that's interesting because arrogance, but I feel like sometimes there is a bit of courage in being in arrogance, in the sense that you're not worrying about what people think because you're just so like brazen and focused on what you want to do. I think there's something to be said about that. So tell me more about the things you used to do with your friends and starting that company.
Oh, so we would enter film competitions, short film competitions, and there was a theatre festival in Sydney called Short and Sweet,
Yes.
which I think branched out into a bunch of different
That's right.
cities after a while. But we would enter that every year, and we would have a great time writing and then blocking out and putting on these performances ourselves. So obviously we were trying to make it bigger and turn it into a professional thing, but at the heart of it, we were just enjoying, again, what the kind of bare bones of it is, which is, just making something.
Seems like it was an enjoyable experience for you that, I would like to think that you look back on as a success, because that's something else I wanted to, get your thoughts on in a culture where we're so fixated on what success looks like conventionally, especially in creative fields. It's having a thriving company or, getting famous and building wealth and all that. But failure obviously is a part of that, is an inevitable part of success. So how do you view that time in your life, and do you feel that your desire to have success in that conventional way affected the way that you did things?
Perhaps not especially. Like, I think when you talk about failure, I guess it's hard to say that I see certain things as failures, because I don't think there was a clear picture exactly of what I was trying to achieve or what we were trying to achieve. So there wasn't an exact benchmark of we've either hit it or we haven't. It was just trying things. It was just trying things, and I think at that time when we were just having fun being creative, the failure was more just, did it come out in the way that we artistically envisaged, or did it get too diluted down, or did it get changed too much because of some outside influence or whatever? So I think that's at that time, that's more what it was about, whether we'd achieved what we envisaged artistically, rather than did we get this level of recognition or that level.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a really good mindset and approach to have with these things.
It
because
does sound a little wanky, though, if you're going to let me say, if I'm allowed to say that on your podcast. Well, I'm sure it's probably a good excuse for people who, did, were trying to get trying to make a name for themselves and didn't quite do that, for them to go, well, it was more about the art,
But I think it's it really goes back to how you define success. So, whether or not it's a, foolish way to view it, I think if you've got the goal of making something with a specific vision, and that's the benchmark for the success. I think as long as that's what you've defined, then that's good, rather than allowing, as you said, other outside influences to define it. Because, people get caught up a lot in the, you know, will my short film get into the festival? Will I win an award? Will this make money for me? And I feel like that takes away from the creative process and the enjoyment of the process. So
Yeah.
I think you and your group, your team, that was in hindsight now, I think it was a great way to look at it, especially as young people just experimenting and just having
Yeah,
fun.
that was it. That experimenting,
Yeah.
yeah. And just picking up on what you said earlier, just around, doing things and maybe not necessarily worrying too much about how many people, really liked it and didn't. I think to some degree, the most creative people, and in comedy as well, they do have that thing of, I'm going to do it this way, and I'll find people out there who like it, and a lot of people might not, and I might get a lot of stick. But yeah, I think I was always very in awe of people like that who just knew, I think this is the way it should be done, and that's how I'm going to do it, and hopefully people come with me.
That's a thing that I've discovered that, inspires me when I talk to creatives. It's just this sense of ambition and drive to go out to do something that you've just imagined, that you've come up with, that, I think creativity is so special in that whilst we have outside inspiration, there is a lot of making something out of nothing in many ways. So what do you think is your greatest motivator for pursuing a creative goal? So, whether it was back in those days of comedy or, full-time work or in the professional industry, what was the thing that is your greatest driver?
It sounds flippant to say that I just don't particularly think I was good at much else.
Right.
But also, I guess, again, it's hard not to sound too wistful and etc. But I think you only get one shot at life, depending on your religious outlook, I suppose. So I don't know. I wanted to spend it doing things that excited me, I guess, and I still get a thrill out of doing something, going, I think that worked. I think that was good, or
Cool.
that fit nicely, or if I'm putting a bit of sound production together or something, going, all those bits just slotted together so nicely, kind of thing. So yeah, I still get the same. I feel I still get the same level of joy out of those moments when they happen as, playing my elephant song or doing my cassette tape podcast.
That's so cool. Can you tell us more about the experiences you've had up to this point that have brought you that feeling?
Myself and my friends who were making the short films and theatre, etc., kind of split up and went our different ways. And I suppose it was probably not long after that I started getting into podcasts and podcasting, and started wondering why I hadn't been doing something more along those lines all the time. So I think a big regret of mine is not pursuing something in radio perhaps earlier. I feel that that's something that should have been obvious but wasn't to me at the time. But yeah, I'd say the last at least 10 years have been all podcast focused as the main creative outlet. And so, the first podcast I started was a sketch show, just, whatever bizarre thoughts I had that week, I would just put them together in audio form and that would go out. And then the next podcast was a kind of more chat-based one with some friends from high school. And I think the feeling there was just basically that we can make each other laugh a lot. So if we can make other people laugh even half the amount we make each other laugh, then, we're providing some enjoyment.
Mm.
This was a while ago. So this was before, every second podcast was a few blokes sitting together thinking they're hilarious.
Yes.
But yeah, and then, other since then I've just done other ones. There's a sport one, there was a TV one, and now currently, I'm doing a parenting one.
Oh,
which
fantastic.
again is more comedy than actual helpfulness. I think it's more kind of making fun of the stereotypical dad mindset than
Yes.
anything else. But I think, what I've come to realize, perhaps only in the last few years, is that podcasts are often therapy for people.
Mm-hmm.
The hosts, I mean, the people making it,
Mm-hmm.
are often therapy for them as much as a piece of entertainment, because,
Yes.
I think especially for men who are of a certain age and grew up probably not feeling like they could express themselves particularly openly in a lot of areas, you stick a microphone in front of their face and, yeah, all of a sudden everyone just seems to be quite happy to open up. So,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, that's just what I've found in the last few years. I know certainly for myself and my friends who make that dad podcast, we all came to a realization at one point that, this helps me and makes me feel better about my parenting to be sitting around talking about this stuff. And then once we'd kind of realized that, I was hearing some other podcasts I know in a different light as well.
I love hearing that because it's so true. It's people often overlook the power of media and the opportunities that art can bring, just on that, on level, as you said, sort of therapeutic sense for the creator, but that sense of community as well. The ability to connect with one another, the people making the thing together, the relationship between the listener and the podcaster. I think it's, something beautiful about audio in terms of harkening back to the days of storytelling. You'd listen to a wise or elderly person talk to a group of people around a fire, that kind of, imagery that I think it's continued in this new kind of way.
Yeah.
And it's probably a testament to, why it's become such a popular platform. Like I'm curious about your views about how you've seen the podcast world evolve, especially since you jumped on board quite early on.
Earlier on, it was just the real nerds who were doing it. And as I said, it was usually guys just sitting around sharing stories and laughing loudly, etc. But obviously, as we've gone on and, we're hearing more diverse voices now, and I think the barrier to entry to podcasting is so low that, it is really as close to an open forum as you can get. Pretty much anyone can make a podcast. If you've got a phone, you can make a podcast. There really is a podcast out there for everything. The diversity of what's being talked about out there, and the fact that, you can pretty much find a podcast on any topic, anytime you feel like it. I think that's the great thing. I think the downside to podcasting at the moment is just more that I'm only really interested in people who are kind of passionate about podcasting. I feel that sometimes these days there are people who do it in a bit of a perfunctory way, in that, I'm told it's a content channel I should have, so I'll do it. That kind of thing. Or, it might help my brand do this, so I'll give it a go, that kind of thing. Which, is a fairly minor point to whinge about. But if it's me, I if you're not kind of, if I can't tell that you're passionate about doing the podcast, then I'm not going to be interested.
Yes, that is a fair point, I think, with, a lot of different media platforms these days, because it has become so accessible. Any person can take advantage and extra, as you said, a revenue channel or like a business strategy. And, those have their merit, but you're right that it's different if it's people that, genuinely have something to share or to say, or have that, great passion for it. Yeah.
I think it's just doing it for the sake of it,
Yes.
And that's not to say that there's not a bunch of great branded content out there. But if you're going to make branded content, you've got to be so creative with it that it's not, people don't see it as branded content,
That's right. Exactly. Because you don't want everything to turn into advertising, and as it seems to be so widespread these days.
There's too much choice for people to listen to something that sounds overly branded. There's no need to. It's not like the old days when there was 5 channels, and so you had to sit there and have ads jammed down your throat pretty much if you're watching anything.
That's right. Yes.
In the podcast world, there's millions of podcasts out there. So if something sounds too much like it's trying to force something on you, you move on to the next one.
That's right. Yes. Well, I would love to kind of pick your brain now about your experience within the corporate world, because I'm sure that, brings a wealth of different experiences and insights versus, your creative things that you've been doing since you were a young kid. But tell us more about, working at one of Australia's leading free-to-air networks, and how you built a career in that, and any lessons that you learned throughout that time.
Around that time, I was becoming a dad. So I needed to find, something a little more stable than some of the things I had been doing prior to that. And so, I started at Network 10 in I guess you'd call it a sales operations role, which we called traffic, which was essentially the go-between between the sales department and the programming department in terms of what's going to play out where and how on the broadcast schedules. For people who don't know, the daily schedule of where the ad breaks are, how long the ad breaks are, where the ads sit, all that, what kind of ad runs, all that sort of thing. Sometimes there's competing priorities between the sales department and the programming department, so we kind of had to be the referee on a lot of occasions on what could run and how and all that sort of thing, and where the airtime would sit. So, and, doing that across several channels every day, 3 times on Friday, making sure that full days were ready for broadcast, was a pretty full-on job. But I think it was a bizarre mix of, having fresh challenges every day to deal with, but also the same thing every day to deal with. The same thing being, we got a deadline, and if you don't hit it, then we got big dramas.
I want to know what some of your greatest challenges were navigating, being in a creative industry, but yet not really having flexibility to be creatively minded, if that makes sense.
I get that completely. I think, it's probably a bit cliche to say, but you priorities change when you have children. So it felt too indulgent to be primarily concerned with doing creative things. But that's not to say I didn't. It was just became more the hobby in those kind of earlier years with Network 10. So, my podcasting was more the hobby rather than what I was, focused on mainly. And what I focused on mainly was trying to be the absolute best at what I was doing so that I could, move up the ladder a bit faster and make sure I was earning enough for my family. So that's what I did. I ended up kind of being promoted reasonably fast until I was the manager of that traffic department. And I was there until that department ended up getting outsourced to a different company.
I'd love you to share with our listeners how you navigated that transition, because I think there's something to be said about your courage at that time, because you created your own opportunities in a time that was very uncertain. So step us through that.
Essentially, I was part of the project to make sure that we were able to have the right systems in place to go from having a sales and traffic team in-house to having it um, externally. So that actually involved writing a bunch of programs to be kind of bridging programs between our systems and the external systems. So I needed to be a part of that to make sure that what they were making made practical sense to the people trying to do the work. I ended up kind of being, again, the referee, but instead of it being between two internal departments, it was between two different departments at different companies who were still having the same sort of arguments, but I guess with the added element of, we don't want them pushing us around and vice versa. It was very challenging, and I think probably where I learned most of my ability to manage stakeholders, making sure that everyone's being heard, everyone's able to, have enough of a say on why what they want should be acknowledged and acted upon, and working out what the priorities are amongst, quite some competing ones, and coming up with a result that doesn't upset everybody. So,
Relationship management as well, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So, again, that was kind of where I found myself at that period of time. And then, after a while, due to other bits of corporate maneuvering, 10 ended up bringing back their sales and traffic department and needing to start them up from scratch again, which meant that I needed to help hire and train a new traffic team at 10.
And then you were instrumental in leading the charge for new projects at 10 once everything moved back in-house. So tell us more about how you started the first ever podcast or the podcasting platform, or flesh that out at a network.
Yeah, the networks have something each year called upfronts, where they tell the media and advertisers what shows they're going to have for the upcoming year and what they can expect and all that sort of thing. And so, in the 2018 upfronts, it was announced by 10 that they were going to create a podcast platform. And, that blew my mind. I went, oh, what? That's amazing. I was not expecting that at all. I thought that was incredible. I thought it was really brave. And in terms of the other commercial networks, they were dabbling, but let's just say they weren't engaging hard in it. And so, I think I decided at that point, I've got to try and involve myself in this somehow. Found out who was in the working group and talked to them and offered my services because, I'd been making independent podcasts for years. And as I said, podcast nerd, had a fair bit to say in terms of, history and context for the industry and that sort of thing. And also, obviously, could help them with audio production, editing.
Yeah.
So, we had a working group which, did the business case and created the platform, etc. And then in the course of kind of working on that, it was becoming clear to me that they might be a bit under-resourced in terms of who was doing what, and there was a bit of a gap where, like, someone who was kind of, I guess, a supervising or exec level producer might be. And so I kind of, did up a bit of a job description and said, look, I think you need someone who can do this, this, and this. Coincidentally, here I am. I can do that. And they agreed. So it got worked into the business plan that that role would be created. And so I ended up being the main lead of that podcast platform for nearly 3 years.
That is awesome. That is so good. And I want to, really hero that, just doing that, putting yourself forward within a workplace, because it seemed like it was a natural step for you when you just, had clarity around, as soon as you heard the podcast platform would be established, you knew straight away. But there are a lot of people that doubt themselves in those kind of moments, that, really fear taking that step. So I commend you for having the courage to just put your hand up and present yourself and come with all of your confidence and skills. So can you revisit, your mindset at that point and tell us like what you were feeling, like how, I think I'm just trying to get a sense of like if I would have done the same thing, or someone else who had a passion and knew they could contribute. But it's really scary when you're in a work environment and you are putting your hand up for something that is, there's no opportunity. You're essentially creating your own opportunities. So I'd like to, just get more of your insights around that, and how, what encouragement can you give to people who they know in their heart that they can contribute, but they're just lacking that bit of courage to just, go for it.
I think it's just everybody, particularly, if you are lacking confidence, or, sometimes have a bit of anxiety and that sort of thing. I think you just see the consequences as this big, scary thing, but it's just kind of there, slightly to the side, and you don't look at it very closely. I think it's just, in those situations, you just have to really look at the consequences as analytically as possible. Really, what's the worst that can happen? Really, without emotion attached, that sort of thing. Be as practical as possible when you're making those decisions, and obviously that's not easy. If it was easy, you wouldn't have anyone with any fear or anything like that.
That's right.
But it just felt like, well, this is too good a thing. Like, I'll regret this forever if I don't try and do it. It's something like my perfect kind of thing that I would love to do is just suddenly opened up right in front of me. I don't,
Yep.
I'm not particularly religious, but it just seemed like, how often is that going to happen? So I'll regret it
Yes.
for the rest of my life if I don't have a try.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, probably the reason I did is because I've had enough of those moments in my life where I've gone, didn't do it, could have done it, would have worked out well,
Right.
now I feel like an idiot, kind of thing. And so I suppose you have to go through enough of those to go, well, I'm not doing that again.
Yes, because everything, I suppose there's a risk element in most things, but it's about, it's as you said, not eradicating the doubt or the fear. It's that's off to the side. It's
Yeah.
looking objectively at the situation and focusing on the thing that you want more, the thing that excites you more, rather than the anxiety or, fear that might be bubbling beneath
That
the
was my
surface.
sensible answer. I can give you a slightly less sensible one if you like.
Let's hear it.
It's back to that arrogance again. It's just, I don't know. I just felt like, I'd done the right thing for about a decade, or not quite a decade, but, I'd done the hard work in another area, and now it was time to try and give myself something back for a while.
Yes.
And, jokes aside about the arrogance, there was a little bit of, I really feel I can help make this platform work. And if I don't and it fails, then I'll be really like that'll be really bad for me. Like I'll feel bad for the network and I'll feel like an idiot myself, kind of thing. So I am painfully aware of how that sounds, but that was the kind of feeling at the time too.
But you would never have known unless you didn't, unless you
Yeah.
tried. So no risk, no reward, as they say. So for you, it paid off, which is just such a great story to hear. And these are, things, by the way, to the listener that I didn't know about Stu because I had left at that point. So, reconnecting now and hearing about what you accomplished, once I had left the network, I think it's just so amazing. So I really commend you for that.
Thank you.
Can you tell us more about what happened after that? Because this was this was quite recently. So I wanted to know what kind of led to your decision to leave the industry and now work on your own.
So yeah, the podcast at 10 started early in 2019, and I suppose we can say that we burned bright and fast in that, particularly the first year, we worked very hard and put a lot of shows out that had quite a lot of success. There was Where's William Tyrrell, which was obviously about the disappearance of the young foster kid in 2014, and we had an interview with the foster parents that they hadn't talked to anybody for quite a few years. And, I think just a combination of true crime, everyone loved true crime, and that particular topic, it just went gangbusters, and, it's had millions of listens, and was kind of a really, effective way to launch the platform. Double-edged sword because, it's obviously a very emotional kind of thing and very sensitive topic and so on. So it's hard to try and look at analytically and in a kind of business sense. It makes you feel about 2 foot tall. But in terms of it helping the platform, it was one of the best possible outcomes for us in terms of launching the platform. And then we had other great podcasts as Professor and the Hack with Hugh Remington and Peter Van Onselen, Short Black with Sandra Sully, which is still going, and won Best Interview Podcast at the Podcast Awards in 2022. We won a journalism award for our 10 News podcast. Producer Stephanie Coombs did a great job, and that episode won the Kennedy Award, New South Wales Journalism Award. So, we achieved a lot, but eventually some circumstances worked against us. It's hard to fight for resources for podcasts in a TV network when TV's struggling, and that's everybody's focus, and obviously rightly so, because that's where all the money is. Eventually, after the 3 years, the podcast platform pretty much just dissipated, and I spent some time with a company called Ample after that, as director of audio production there. Again, that was a weird experience for me. I'd gone from a big media company to a startup company, and the gear shift was pretty hard at times. Worked very long hours, wasn't very present for my family that year at all. All in an effort to try and make everything work and make this thing grow, but eventually it wasn't working, and then so I ended up freelancing, which I've been doing since pretty much the end of 2022, a little bit in 2021, but pretty much mainly from the end of 2022, and also doing some work in the New South Wales courts.
I think we have a similar experience in terms of losing our jobs and being unemployed after having some success already in the professional industry. So I want to learn more about, your mindset around that and how you were able just to, keep going and find some resilience, at a time where, as you said, company no longer needs you, because that's something that I think is not talked about a lot. But it is, really challenging thing to navigate, and everyone
Yeah.
experiences it differently. But I'd like to know how it affected you.
Well, I was let go in October 2 years in a row. So yeah, in that third year, I approached October very trepidatiously, but it was fine. Nothing happened in that October of 2023. I don't know that I fully processed it the first time in terms of how I felt about it. I was nervous about how, it would affect family life. I didn't want my family to be worried. So I was more worried about how they were going to feel and not making them anxious than how I was feeling about it, to be perfectly honest. On some level, there's the feeling when you get let go by a company that, particularly if you've been working hard and had success or were doing a good job personally, that, I've done my side of the bargain. Where's your side of the bargain kind of thing. But, I think you get over that pretty quickly because business is business and no one starts a business in the hopes of letting people go. it's
Yeah.
it's just circumstance and, very often, particularly in Ten's case, they went through 3 or 4 different owners in the same amount of years almost. And, there's always the previous people to blame, I suppose, when things go wrong. Same as governments, it's always the last government's fault. So
Yes, yeah. That's such a pragmatic and mature response to have around it, I think, and again, that in a way takes courage too, to be able to look at things and just be objective around it. So I think there's a lot to learn from that, because losing a job is never fun for anybody. But you're right that it's not as if employers have that as a goal.
yeah,
Circumstances, so just that's an interesting perspective. Facing rejection, facing setbacks, it's something that everyone struggles with, but particularly young people who are pursuing creative careers. It's almost part of the the pathway as a creative, that you have to just learn to accept that rejection's part of the game. But what advice could you give to people that haven't yet built that resilience or haven't built confidence around it? How are you able to look at these things objectively rather than allow the emotional side of things to keep you down?
I might not answer that exactly in the way that you're asking, in that I actually think the emotion of working for a company a long while and then being let go is probably not something that's going to be that normal for younger generations. Like, the more you see it now, the more short-term, gig-like, etc. the employment is. So I suspect that the sort of situation where you work for one company full-time all the time is not going to be the norm for a lot of people. I think there'll be a lot of kind of gig work of, having 3 or 4 different jobs that you juggle through the week, or just kind of more short-term work, that sort of thing. I don't know, I suspect,
Well, the
based on,
landscape's changed so much. So yes, I
yeah,
get that. Yeah.
I'm not basing this on any particular study I've read, but just it feels to me like that's the direction the kind of employment world is going, I suppose. So I suspect that younger people would probably be conditioned to not have as an emotional attachment, I think, maybe.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I suppose, in terms of how to deal with rejection or failure in employment, it's just down again to what you do for your own confidence and anxiety in any other area, how you manage that, because it's not healthy to attribute too much self-worth to what you do for money. I know a lot of people weave it into their identity, like they are their work. But if you're going to do that willingly, then yeah, obviously when things go wrong, it's going to hit harder. And
Yes.
you really should have the confidence and self-worth and knowledge of who you are as a person, that it's not too tied in with exactly what you do in your work hours. I don't know.
Yes.
That
Oof.
sounds like a bit of a vague
No,
answer, but
no, not at all. I think that just really hits the target on what, the ideas we're trying to share through this show as well, is how you define yourself, because that's something I struggled with personally too, just tying my identity to my work. And once when that breaks away, you're suddenly confronted with, that lack of self-worth. You're not sure who you are outside of that job. So such an important point. And I'm so glad that we're on the same page with that, because our lives are rich and complex and beautiful, and we should be seeing them in a holistic way, not just through the lens of paid employment. I'd love to know what are some lessons you've learned, throughout your career, and other strategies that you have that has enabled you to accomplish what you set out to do in your career. So, anything specific that you can maybe encourage someone who's looking to work in creative industry with.
you have to trust your instinct if you're wanting to be a creative person. And that's when you're making something in the creative process, but also just in terms of practically where you are at a given point and what you're trying to do. I think a lot of what I've done has, and I don't know if this is good advice, but it's felt right, and then I've made justifications afterwards to like the steps of logic afterwards almost. But I think I've learnt to trust my instinct and know when's the right time to make a bold move, or I'm going to have trouble justifying this later if I do this. So I won't. Perhaps I won't, or perhaps I'll wait and see. But it's hard to articulate, I think. But you just know if something's right most of the time. And I don't know if that's helpful. The reason I say I don't know if that's helpful advice is because I don't think I particularly have self-confidence problems. So I don't know if that's something that somebody who does have self-confidence problems feels. I don't know if they have that kind of approach where, well, it feels right, but I'm going to throw up blockers as to why I shouldn't do it, that sort of thing.
I think it is helpful, because I think it ties back with what you said before about what you tie your identity to. When I heard this quote, it always comes back to me that, how do you know where you're going if you don't know who you are? And I'm not sure who I attribute that to, but it's true that if you know who you are, as you do, and you have the ability to trust in your instincts, therefore you can make decisions based on that, rather than if your identity is tied to other things or what other people measure as right or successful or whatever. That's harder to do because your identity is tied up in other things. So I think it is helpful. I think that's good. Trust your instincts. It's simple in the sense, but hard to do, I think.
Yeah. Like, I know there are people out there who are extremely talented and extremely creative who do have, confidence issues. But I mean, most of the time, people who are talented and successful enough to get to, be in a position to make it a career have ways to circumvent that themselves, or have learnt to do it. And I think it's just something. It's if you want to have that sort of career, you are gonna get rejection, and particularly these days, like, open your phone and you'll have people bashing you if you're have any kind of profile. So I think, well, I suppose the advice would be, before you pursue that sort of thing, work on your resilience, because you're going to need it.
Well, on that, we get to the harder questions, or the bigger questions, I suppose. All things considered, everything we've discussed, how do you, Stu, define courage? in your personal point of view, what does courage look like to you?
I suppose it is convincing yourself to do something knowing that there's not a safety net. Now, that sounds a little glib, but it's pretty much it, because, there are just simply times when you've either got to go for something or not. If you don't go for it, then you've got to be happy with staying where you are. If you do go for it and fail, then you got to cop whatever the consequence is there. But it is just having that drive to do something without knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I always see it as pre-kid and post-kid, really, for me. The courage you show before you're responsible for other people is very different to the courage you show after. And so, that's why I kind of made sure that I was doing the best that I could in the corporate world for about a decade before branching out into more creative things, because my courage in that moment was, putting my own desires aside and making sure that I was being the best provider I could be. I was being the most responsible, guardian I could be. I was pretty scared to be jumping into podcasting. I had no guarantees that the platform would stay around. I didn't really have any guarantees that I would do a good job of it. So it's about timing, really. I think it's, you got to know when to be courageous. You can't just be courageous at any given point, because I don't think that's courage. That's just being reckless, almost.
I'd like to think of courage as being the main course, because it seems to underpin a lot of things, especially when it comes to careers and creativity and decisions you make in life. So if courage is the main course, I'd like to know what you think is a good accompanying side dish or beverage to courage. So whether that's, a particular mindset or a habit, another skill or a virtue that pairs well with courage.
I think you do need some modesty if you spend a lot of time being courageous, because, if you make a lot of bold choices and do a lot of big courageous acts and so on, I think people need to, if you're going to stay in their favor, you're going to need to be able to show some humility and show some down-to-earthness as well. Otherwise, you're going to be seen as some sort of wild character who just does whatever they like at any given point. So, yeah, I think, perhaps you'd call it a sorbet, little humility
Yes.
sorbet
I like
after the
that. That's
just to
true.
cleanse
To
the
cleanse
palate
your
a little.
palate.
Yeah,
I
before
love
the
it.
next courageous act. Yeah.
I love it. Perfect. Sounds very well balanced to me, Stu. Thank you. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, just with regards to what we've explored today?
I mean, if I've got anything to pass on, it's just that you'll know whether you have the right feeling about something at a certain time. And so the courage is really whether you act on that feeling or not. It's not really about whether you do something or not. I think there's a step in between, which is knowing that it's right and then being able to act.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for, first of all, taking time to chat today and for deep diving into these topics with me, but also with being open about your story and your career journey. I I have really loved, learning more about you, because these are things we didn't talk about when we were working together,
No.
or there was no time to.
Mm.
But I really admire everything that you've done as a creative, even from, improvising and a song about elephants when you were a little boy. Just people like you who kind of lead with that passion really inspire me, because as you said, the other things that are associated with this, the creative ego, which is the doubts and the fears and imposter syndrome and all those things, they are a part of it. But you've taught me that to put them off to the side, that it is possible to follow through and trust your instincts and build a life for yourself that is based on what courage is in that moment. And as you said before, it's about the timing of that, choosing when that works best for you, and making sure that feeling is right. So I want to thank you for imparting that wisdom, for being so thoughtful and articulate in getting those ideas across. And I am sure people listening would value that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for saying that. You're right. I have put my imposter syndrome to the side while doing this interview, because I never feel like I'm particularly an expert at anything, but hopefully you can make something of it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You've given me a lot to think about, so I appreciate it. And I'd like to give you the chance now to share with our listeners where they can connect with you if they wanted to learn more a bit about what you do, and any projects coming up that you'd like people to check out.
Sure. Yeah, well, I've got a couple of podcasts running at the moment. There's the parenting one I was talking about. That's called Dad Pants. You can check
Love
that out.
it.
There's also Bit Weird But Fair Enough, I guess, which is just weird stories that I talk about with some people. You can find those in your podcast player just by searching those, or on Instagram, Facebook. It used to be on Twitter, but I really don't know what that is anymore. Bizarre place these days. One of the freelance projects, one of my clients is, we're releasing a podcast very soon called 404 Brain Not Found, which is about young stroke survivors. So the host, Piers Grove, is a successful publisher. He was one of the guys that started the Batuta Advocate. He's been managing director of Australian Geographic, Junkie at one point, Daily Oz, etc. And yeah, at the age of 45, woke up one morning suffering from a stroke. And so it's about his story, and also, it shines a bit of a light on the fact that, a lot of people's perceptions and even the kind of services that people get when they suffer from a stroke are more geared towards old people who are stroke survivors, and not a lot of people factor in that there are, younger people that suffer from stroke. So it's really about talking about that and how to get yourself back on track. I think they're the main ones at the moment.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure to link them down in the show notes. Lots to check out there. Lots of good stuff. Stu Buckland, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been great to talk again. We haven't talked in a long time, and I love the fact that you've got your own podcast, and that's courage right there.
Thank you, Stu. Chat soon.
Thank you.